The first drop of blood struck the polished floor before anyone in the music room noticed. Matilda Draycott was hurt. It landed soundlessly beneath the pianoforte bench at Falconhurst Hall, bright against the dark oak, while 30 guests listened to the closing bars of a Fantasia they believed had been composed by another woman. A second drop followed, then a third. Matilda kept playing. It was October of 1862 in Yorkshire, and the great music room glowed beneath 3 chandeliers and 40 wax candles arranged along mirrored walls. Silk skirts whispered across the floor. Gentlemen stood near the marble fireplace with glasses in hand. Servants moved quietly at the edges of the room, adjusting candles and carrying trays, while a string quartet waited for Matilda to guide them through the final movement. At the center of it all sat Mrs. Hester Draycott, resplendent in deep green silk, receiving praise with practiced modesty for the new composition, advertised in every printed program as her own. Matilda sat several yards away at the pianoforte, almost hidden behind the raised lid. She was 29, plainly dressed in dove-grey silk that had been altered more than once, her brown hair arranged without fashionable ornament, her posture so composed that no one looking at her face would have guessed that every movement of her right foot sent pain through her heel. Hester had insisted that every woman appearing before the invited audience wear matching ivory satin slippers. Unity, she had called it. Elegance. Matilda's pair had been made for someone with smaller feet. She had known that the moment she put them on. She had also known better than to complain. So she had played the opening movement, corrected the second violinist's late entrance with a glance, turned a page for the flutist. When the hired assistant forgot, softened the accompaniment beneath Lady Priscilla's uncertain soprano, and continued through every bar while the satin tightened and the inner seam cut deeper into her skin. The musicians depended on her. Stopping would embarrass them. Worse, it would embarrass Hester. Matilda had spent 6 years learning. That embarrassment travelled downward in Falconhurst Hall until it reached the person least able to defend herself. She pressed the sustaining pedal and entered the final passage. The melody rose. The violins followed. The cellist found his line. Around the room, guests leaned forward, moved by a sequence. Hester had described over dinner as having come to her during a sleepless night. Matilda knew exactly when that melody had come into existence. It had been raining. She had been alone. She had written the first 8 measures before dawn. Her fingers did not falter, not when her heel burned, not when she felt warmth inside the slipper, not when she understood what it meant. She simply played. The doors opened during the final variation. Rupert Duncombe, Duke of Wexbourne, entered late enough to attract every eye except Matilda's. He was 36, tall without theatricality, dark-haired, impeccably dressed, and burdened with the sort of rank that caused conversations to alter before he reached them. Mothers straightened, daughters remembered their posture. Hester brightened visibly from across the room. Rupert acknowledged the assembly with a brief inclination of his head and moved no farther than the doorway. He had expected music. He had expected flattery. He had not expected to arrive in time for applause. The final chord sounded. The room erupted. Hester lowered her eyes in a display of graceful embarrassment. Matilda lifted her hands from the keys. No one saw her grip the edge of the bench for half a second before she released it. No one except Rupert, and even he did not yet know what he had seen. He moved farther into the room while Hester's admirers surrounded her. "Extraordinary, Mrs. Draycott. The central theme was exquisite. You must tell us how such a melody came to you. Hester smiled. One never quite knows where inspiration begins, does one? Rupert almost smiled at that. Then he looked down. A dark red drop gleamed on the floor near his left shoe. Another lay 2 feet beyond it. A third marked the oak beneath the pianoforte bench. His expression changed. While the room applauded the woman in green silk, the Duke followed the blood. Matilda was already placing the next score on the stand. Miss Draycott. His voice was not loud, but it carried. Her hands stopped. Several nearby conversations faded. Matilda looked up and found the Duke of Wexbourne standing beside the pianoforte. At first, she assumed he meant to ask about the next piece. Your Grace. His gaze lowered to the floor, then to her ivory slipper. Are you injured? Hester laughed before Matilda could answer. Oh, surely not. Matilda is forever forgetting herself when there is music to finish. Matilda felt every eye near the pianoforte turn toward her. The old instinct came at once. Minimize, reassure, make no trouble. It's only the shoe, Your Grace. Rupert looked at the blood beneath her foot. Shoes rarely bleed. A few guests shifted. Hester's smile tightened. Matilda is devoted to finishing what she begins. Rupert turned his head toward her. His tone remained mild. Does devotion ordinarily require blood in this house? Silence moved outward from the pianoforte. Matilda felt heat rise to her face. She would have preferred the pain. Pain was private. Attention was not. I am quite able to continue, she said. I don't doubt it, Rupert replied. That isn't the question. Something in his voice unsettled her more deeply than pity would have. There was no pity in it, no indulgence, only attention. Exact, unwelcome, impossible attention. He looked toward the housekeeper standing near the rear door. Mrs. Canning, is there a female attendant who may assist Miss Draycott? At once, Your Grace. Hester took one step forward. There is really no need to interrupt the evening. Rupert glanced at the program in his hand. Then the evening will survive 5 minutes without Miss Draycott. His eyes moved to the musicians, who were waiting in visible uncertainty. Unless, of course, it cannot. The first violinist lowered his bow. No one answered. Matilda understood the implication before anyone spoke it. They could continue without Hester. They could not continue without her. The knowledge should have felt satisfying. Instead, it frightened her. Hester heard it too. Matilda, she said with controlled warmth, go and have the foolish thing bandaged. We shall resume shortly. Matilda rose carefully. Pain flashed through her heel, sharp enough to steal her breath. Rupert moved instinctively, then stopped before touching her. May I offer my arm? She looked at him. The question itself surprised her. Men of his rank were not accustomed to asking women in her position what they preferred. Thank you, Your Grace, but Mrs. Canning will assist me. Of course. No offense. No insistence. He stepped back. Matilda took one careful step, then another. The room seemed impossibly large. She was halfway to the door when a loose manuscript page slipped from the stack she had left beside the pianoforte and drifted to the floor. Rupert bent and picked it up. Miss Draycott. She turned. He held the page by its edge. Yours? Her heart gave one hard beat. In the margin, written in her own hand, was a correction to the second variation. She knew the page. She had rewritten that passage 3 nights earlier. Hester's printed program, still folded in Rupert's other hand, credited the entire Fantasia to Mrs. Hester Draycott. Matilda crossed the distance and accepted the page. Yes, Your Grace. The page? His eyes rested on the correction, or the alteration. Behind him, Hester had gone very still. Matilda could feel her watching. She could feel God knew how many years of silence standing between the truth and her tongue. "The alteration," she said at last. Rupert studied her face. "I see." But the quiet way he said it told her he saw far more than she wanted him to. Mrs. Canning reached her side and gently took her arm. Matilda turned toward the door. Behind her, conversation slowly resumed. Uncertain and thinner than before, she had almost crossed the threshold when she heard a gentleman praise Hester once more for the beauty of the final movement. Hester thanked him. Matilda did not look back. Rupert did. He glanced from the woman accepting the praise to the handwritten correction in Matilda's departing hand. Then he lowered his eyes to the 3 drops of blood still bright upon the floor. Mrs. Canning did not speak until the door of the small morning room had closed behind them. Only then did she guide Matilda toward a cushioned chair near the fire, and kneel with the calm efficiency of someone who had spent 30 years managing ailments, fainting guests, frightened maids, and minor household catastrophes, without once allowing panic to improve any of them. "Sit, Miss Draycott." Matilda obeyed. The moment she took the weight from her injured foot, the pain sharpened before slowly easing. An older maid named Mrs. Bell entered with warm water, clean linen, and a small wooden box of household remedies. She had served at Falconhurst longer than Matilda had lived there, and possessed the grave face of a woman who considered fussing a moral weakness. Yet when she saw the stained ivory slipper, something tightened around her mouth. "That one again," she murmured. Matilda looked at her. "Again, Mrs." Bell realized too late that she had spoken aloud. Mrs. Canning glanced at her, then at Matilda. "Let us remove it first." The satin had dried against the torn skin at Matilda's heel. Mrs. Canning worked slowly, wetting the edge of the slipper before easing it free. Matilda gripped the arm of the chair, but made no sound. Mrs. Bell noticed. "You needn't prove anything in this room," she said. "I'm not proving anything." "No?" Mrs. Bell raised one eyebrow. "Then you're very quiet by nature." Matilda almost smiled. The slipper came away. The injury was not grave, but the skin was raw and bleeding where the seam had rubbed through. Mrs. Canning cleaned it carefully. "No infection if we keep it clean. No more satin shoes until this heals." Matilda looked toward the door by instinct. "Mrs. Draycott will expect me downstairs." Mrs. Canning did not even turn her head. "Mrs. Draycott may expect the moon to be lowered into her soup tureen. It does not follow that the household must arrange it." Mrs. Bell coughed to hide a laugh. Matilda's smile came and vanished quickly. "The musicians will need someone. The musicians have survived wars, marriages, and several sopranos," Mrs. Canning said. "They will survive one evening without you." She lifted the slipper and examined the inside. Her brow furrowed. "This has been altered." Mrs. Bell looked down. "Twice." Matilda turned to her. "You know that?" Mrs. Bell hesitated. "I fetched it from the dressing room this afternoon. I remembered the stitching." "Whose was it?" Matilda asked. Mrs. Bell lowered her voice. "Miss Celia Barrow's, before she married and left the house 3 years ago. Smaller feet than yours by half an inch, perhaps more." Matilda stared at the slipper. Hester had told her they were new. Not expensive, of course. There had been no reason to expect expense, but new. "Why did no one tell me?" she asked. Mrs. Bell looked ashamed. "Because no one thought you'd complain." The words settled quietly. They hurt more than Matilda expected. Not because they were cruel, because they were true. Mrs. Canning wrapped clean linen around her heel. "There, you will rest tonight." Matilda lowered her gaze to the slipper. "Please do not blame Sarah for bringing them to me. She only followed instructions. Mrs. Bell gave her a long look. You were bleeding through your shoe, and you're worried about the maid. Sarah lost 2 days' wages last winter because I mentioned that my room had no coal. Mrs. Canning went still. Matilda continued before either woman could answer. Mrs. Draycott said the servants had become careless because I encouraged complaint. Sarah was blamed for failing to notice the grate was empty. She had been told not to supply that room until the following morning. Mrs. Bell said quietly, I know. Matilda folded her hands in her lap. That is why I did not mention the shoes. Mrs. Canning's expression changed. Not pity. Something harder. Miss Draycott, silence may protect a servant for a day. It may also teach the person causing harm that there will never be a cost. Matilda looked at her bandaged foot. I know that now. A soft knock came at the door. Mrs. Bell opened it to a footman carrying a folded note on a tray. From His Grace, he said. Matilda's pulse changed. Mrs. Canning accepted the message and handed it to her. The note was brief. The Duke of Wexbourne had recovered a manuscript page belonging to Miss Draycott and wished to know whether she wanted it returned that evening or the following morning. That was all. No command, no assumption, no mention of blood. Matilda read it twice. What shall I tell him? Mrs. Canning asked. Matilda looked toward the closed door, imagining the page in Rupert Duncombe's possession, her correction, her hand. Hester's name printed below music Matilda had written. For years, she had told herself the arrangement was temporary. At first, Hester had only asked for help polishing a melody. Then, Matilda had supplied a passage, then an ending, then an entire composition Hester called collaborative, although Matilda had written every note. The next program had credited Mrs. Hester Draycott alone. Matilda had protested once. Hester had reminded her how difficult respectable employment could be for an unmarried gentlewoman without family money. She had mentioned references. She had mentioned gratitude. She had smiled. After that, Matilda had learned to disappear from her own work. Tell him I should like my page returned, she said. The words sounded small. They did not feel small. Mrs. Canning inclined her head and sent the reply. By the time she and Mrs. Bell left, the music below had resumed without Matilda. The sound came faintly through the floor. Uncertain at first, then stumbling badly at a transition she would normally have corrected. Matilda sat alone, listening. A movement could survive being played poorly. A room could survive disappointment. A woman, perhaps, could survive refusing to make everything easier for everyone else. The door opened without a knock. Hester entered carrying a manuscript. She had removed none of her jewelry. Emeralds still gleamed at her throat. Her expression was composed, but the warmth she wore for guests had vanished. You caused an unnecessary spectacle. Matilda looked at her. I was injured. You were inconvenienced. Hester set the manuscript on a side table. His Grace turned the entire evening toward you. I did not ask him to. You did not need to. Silence can be very theatrical when accompanied by blood. Matilda felt the old instinct rise, apologize, soften, restore peace. She did none of those things. Hester noticed. Her eyes narrowed slightly. You will finish the final variation tonight. Matilda glanced at the manuscript. Mrs. Canning told me to rest. Mrs. Canning manages linen and servants. She does not manage my program. Hester moved toward the door, then paused. The York announcement will go out soon. Mr. Bexham expects the completed score. Matilda's attention sharpened. Mr. Bexham, do not pretend surprise. Publication is expensive. Influence is useful. You should be grateful your work brings you so close to people of consequence. There it was again. your work when labor was required. Hester's music when praise arrived. Good night, Matilda. The door closed behind her. For a long moment, Matilda did not move. Then she reached for the manuscript. The title page was already prepared in a fine engraved hand. A new Fantasia by Mrs. Hester Draycott. Beneath it lay 12 pages of Matilda's own music, her harmonies, her structure, her unfinished ending. She took the silver tuning fork from the velvet pouch in her reticule and held it in her palm. Her father had carried it for 20 years. He used to strike it before lessons and listen until the note faded completely. A true note does not become false because a crowded room prefers another. She had not thought of those words in years. Another knock came. This one was proper and measured. Mrs. Canning entered carrying a single manuscript page. His Grace asked that this be delivered to you. Matilda took it. Her correction remained visible in the margin. Her handwriting looked almost defiant now that someone else had noticed it. The next morning, she found Rupert waiting in the breakfast room, with Hester and 2 other guests already present. He rose when Matilda entered. His eyes dropped briefly to her plain walking shoes, then returned to her face. No pity, no amusement, only recognition. Miss Draycott, I trust the page was returned safely. Yes, Your Grace, thank you. He reached for the program beside his plate and opened it to the Fantasia. May I ask you something? Hester's teacup stopped halfway to her lips. Matilda knew she should be careful. Of course. Rupert placed one finger on the printed passage that matched the correction she had made. Did Mrs. Draycott compose this? The room became very quiet. Matilda looked at Hester, then at Rupert. Her answer would cost something. She knew that before she spoke. But for the first time in years, silence felt expensive too. She could not say yes. She could not yet say no, so she said nothing. Rupert held her gaze for one long second. Then he looked down at the program. I see. And Matilda understood, with a sudden mixture of fear and relief, that he did. Rupert did not press her for an answer. That unsettled Matilda more than persistence would have. He simply returned his attention to the program, folded it once, and set it beside his plate as though the silence had been sufficient. Hester recovered first. His Grace is teasing you, Matilda. You must not encourage him by looking so solemn. Rupert reached for his coffee. I rarely tease people about authorship, Mrs. Draycott. It seems an inefficient subject for comedy. One of the other guests smiled uncertainly. Hester did not. Matilda lowered herself carefully into the nearest chair. Her heel still ached beneath its bandage, but the pain had become manageable. What she could not manage was the awareness that Rupert had seen enough to question the story everyone else accepted. He did not know the truth. Not yet, but he had begun looking in the correct direction. Breakfast continued with the forced ease of a room. Pretending nothing had shifted, Hester discussed the York subscription concert. A gentleman from Leeds praised her taste. Rupert asked no more questions until the footman entered to announce that Mr. Godfrey Bexham had arrived from London. Hester brightened at once, at last. Matilda felt something cold move through her. Godfrey Bexham was not merely a publisher. He was a promoter, negotiator, collector of wealthy subscribers, and a man who could turn drawing-room admiration into printed reputation. He had handled Hester's last 3 editions. He had also never once asked Matilda what she thought of the music she prepared for him. Bexham entered 5 minutes later in a dark morning coat, with perfectly brushed shoulders, and the confidence of a man who believed every room contained either a patron or an employee. He was perhaps 45. handsome in a polished way, with silver beginning at his temples and a smile that never appeared to cost him anything. He bowed deeply to Rupert, warmly to Hester, and barely to Matilda. "Miss Draycott, still saving us all from illegible parts, I trust, when necessary," Matilda said. "And necessary remarkably often," Hester added with a laugh. Bexham smiled. The invisible labor behind great art. One must be grateful for such reliable hands. Matilda felt Rupert look at her. She kept her expression still. Bexham accepted coffee and began discussing the York concert. The Fantasia, he explained, had already attracted interest among subscribers. Several copies could be sold before the first public performance. Hester listened with satisfaction concealed beneath false modesty. Rupert listened with the appearance of mild distraction. Matilda knew better now. "I confess I am curious," Rupert said at last. Bexham turned toward him eagerly. "About the publication, Your Grace. About the composition." Hester placed her cup down. Rupert continued. "Mrs. Draycott, which movement was most difficult to write?" There was nothing improper in the question, nothing accusatory. Hester smiled. "The second, undoubtedly." Matilda's fingers tightened beneath the table. The second movement had been the easiest. She had written most of it in one afternoon. Rupert nodded. Because of the change in key before the second variation, Hester's pause lasted only a moment. "Precisely." Matilda looked at him. Rupert did not look back. "Interesting," he said. "I had thought the modulation occurred after the variation." Bexham cleared his throat. "Musical terminology can be quite fluid in conversation." Rupert smiled. "How fortunate. Accuracy is so often inconvenient." The gentleman from Leeds laughed, believing it a joke. Hester did not. Rupert turned to Bexham. "You have the earliest draft, I suppose." "The printer has what is necessary." "That was not my question." Bexham's smile remained, but only just. "Mrs. Draycott's work develops across several copies. There is rarely one definitive first version." "How modern," Rupert said. "A work without a beginning." Matilda had to lower her eyes to hide the brief curve of her mouth. Hester saw it. The look she gave Matilda was small and sharp. Rupert noticed that too. He changed the subject before Hester could retaliate in public. "Perhaps I should hear the piece properly before pretending expertise. Is there a rehearsal this afternoon?" "There is," Hester said, "though Matilda should rest." "I can play," Matilda said. Hester turned toward her. "Your foot. My hands are unharmed." Rupert studied her for a second. A useful distinction. The rehearsal began after luncheon in the music room. Matilda sat at the pianoforte in plain black shoes borrowed from Mrs. Canning. The orchestra was smaller than the evening before, only 5 musicians. But the missing parts still required adjustment. Rupert stood near the windows, apparently occupied with a letter. Bexham sat beside Hester with a stack of proofs. Matilda began the first movement. Halfway through, the second violinist hesitated. "Miss Draycott, should that entrance be one measure later?" "Yes," Matilda said at once, after the descending phrase in the cello. Bexham looked up. "No, the printed copy shows the present entry." Matilda turned toward him. "The printed copy is wrong." Silence. Bexham's expression cooled. "The printed copy follows Mrs. Draycott's score." Hester lifted her chin. Naturally, the violinist glanced between them. Matilda could have yielded. She had done so before. Instead, she said, "Then the score contains an error." Bexham's smile disappeared. Rupert folded his letter. How inconvenient for the score. Hester gave him a strained laugh. "Matilda is very particular." "I had noticed." Rupert moved closer to the pianoforte. "Which version produces the cleaner phrase?" The cellist answered before anyone else could. "Miss Draycott's Your Grace." The violinist nodded. "By far." Bexham tapped one finger against the proofs. Performers often prefer ease to intention. Matilda felt heat rise through her chest, but she kept her voice level. "The change is not easier. It is structurally necessary." Rupert looked at her. "Why?" Bexham opened his mouth. Rupert did not raise his voice. "I had asked Miss Draycott." The room went quiet again. Matilda looked at the score. Then she explained. "The first phrase rises by step. The cello answers by inversion. If the violin enters too early, it interrupts the answer before the harmony resolves. The later entrance restores the balance." Rupert listened without interruption. When she finished, he turned to Hester. "Is that what you intended?" Hester's face remained composed. "Of course." "Then Mr. Bexham's printer has done you a disservice." Bexham shifted. "A trivial error, perhaps, though trivial errors do seem remarkably loyal to Miss Draycott's corrections." No one answered. Rupert glanced at 3 sets of marked rehearsal pages spread across the pianoforte. The same brown ink appeared again and again in Matilda's handwriting. A changed rest, a revised entrance, a harmonic adjustment. Hester's name stood at the top. Matilda's thinking lived in the margins. Bexham rose. "I should speak with Mrs. Draycott privately before the next printing." "An excellent idea," Rupert said, "though before you go, I would still enjoy seeing the earliest draft." Bexham met his gaze. "I am afraid that not be possible." "Lost, dispersed, burned, no. Then we are making progress." Matilda looked down quickly. This time she could not entirely hide her smile. Rupert saw it. His own expression changed by less than an inch, but she knew he had seen. Hester ended the rehearsal soon afterward, when the musicians had left and Bexham had followed Hester into the adjoining drawing room. Matilda gathered the marked scores. Rupert remained by the pianoforte. Properly, they were not entirely alone. The door to the hall stood open, and Mrs. Canning was visible at a table beyond it. Even so, Matilda felt the difference in the quiet. Rupert touched none of the pages. "May I ask you one question?" she continued, arranging the music. "You already have. Then I shall risk a second." She looked at him. His eyes were lighter than she had first thought, grey rather than blue, and far too attentive. "If the piece were yours," he said, "what would you change?" The answer escaped before caution could stop it. "The ending." Rupert's gaze sharpened. "Why?" Matilda looked at the final page. "Because it returns to the opening theme too easily. It repeats what has already been said instead of changing what the listener understands." "And you have another ending in mind?" She hesitated. "Yes." Rupert smiled slightly, not triumphantly, almost sadly. "Then Mrs. Draycott has a problem." Matilda's pulse quickened. "What problem?" He picked up the printed program from the pianoforte and tapped the title with one finger. "She told me yesterday the composition was perfect." From the adjoining room came the faint sound of Bexham's voice, lowered and urgent. Then Hester's. Matilda could not hear the words. She did not need to. Rupert looked toward the closed door, then back at the scores in her hands. "And yet," he said quietly, "the only person who seems to know what is wrong with the music is the woman whose name is nowhere on it." The next afternoon, Matilda arrived in the music room before the musicians and found that someone had changed her chair. The narrow bench she usually used had been replaced with a cushioned seat of proper height, and a small footstool stood beneath the pianoforte. Beside it waited a pair of plain black shoes, soft enough to spare her injured heel. Mrs. Canning was arranging music near the window, which meant Matilda was not alone. Even so, she knew at once who had noticed. Rupert stood near the far fireplace with a book in one hand and an expression of such complete innocence that she nearly smiled before she had reason to. "Your Grace," she said. He looked up. She glanced at the chair. "This is new, so I am told. And the shoes? A mystery, a convenient one." His mouth shifted slightly. "The best sort." Matilda set her music on the stand. She could have objected. Part of her wanted to. Kindness still made her uneasy when it arrived without a price attached. Yet the chair was sensible, the shoes fit, and Mrs. Canning was watching with an expression that made clear she would tolerate no martyrdom disguised as politeness. Matilda sat. The relief in her heel was immediate. Rupert returned his attention to the book, though she noticed he did not turn the page. She opened the velvet pouch she carried in her reticule and removed the small silver tuning fork that had belonged to her father. Its metal surface had dulled with years of use, but the stem still carried a faint indentation where his thumb had rested. Matilda struck it lightly against the edge of the pianoforte and held it near her ear. A pure note entered the room, quiet, steady, true. Rupert lowered his book. "What is that?" "A tuning fork." "I had gathered that much. I meant that particular one." Matilda looked at the silver in her hand. She rarely spoke about her father to people who had not known him. His memory belonged to a part of her life untouched by Falconhurst. "It was my father's." Rupert came no closer. Was he a musician, an organist and teacher, provincial but respected? You say, provincial, as though the countryside has never produced anything of value. Society often behaves as though it has not. Society also believes a dinner becomes more important when there are 6 forks beside the plate. I would not depend upon its judgment. Matilda smiled despite herself. Rupert noticed and looked suspiciously pleased. "He taught you?" he asked. "Everything I know that matters." She struck the tuning fork again. The note shimmered between them. "Before every lesson, he would make me listen until the sound faded completely," he said. "Most people hurry toward the next note because they are afraid of silence." Rupert's expression changed. The humor remained, but something quieter appeared beneath it. "And were you afraid of silence?" "Not then." She lowered the fork. "Later, perhaps." He watched her for a moment. "Your father sounds like a wise man. He was." "What else did he teach you?" Matilda looked down at the instrument in her hand. The words came back with such clarity that for a moment she could almost hear her father's voice in the small stone church where he had once given lessons. He used to say, "A true note does not become false because a crowded room prefers another." Rupert went still. The sentence seemed to enter him more deeply than she had intended. "That is either excellent musical advice," he said, "or a devastating assessment of society. With my father, it was often both." This time Rupert laughed softly. It was not the polished laugh of a man entertaining a room. It was brief and real. Matilda looked at him before she could stop herself. He noticed. "You are surprised?" "A little." "How damaging to my reputation. I had not realized your Grace possessed one that depended upon solemnity." "It does not. Mine depends upon appearing amused before anyone notices I am not." The admission was so unexpected that Matilda forgot to guard her expression. Rupert closed the book. "There, now you look even more alarmed. You have confessed to dishonesty. Only social efficiency. Is that what gentlemen call it? Dukes do. It saves time." She laughed then, quietly but genuinely. Rupert's face softened. For one strange moment, the room felt smaller. Not intimate in any improper sense. Mrs. Canning was still near the window, and the door to the corridor remained open. Yet Matilda felt something unfamiliar. Ease. It frightened her almost as much as scrutiny once had. She looked back at the tuning fork. "Do you distrust everyone?" she asked. Rupert considered the question. "No, I distrust performance. That seems difficult for a man who spends much of his life in drawing rooms. It is exhausting." "Then how do you decide whom to believe?" He glanced toward the door through which Hester usually entered. "I believe people most when they forget to perform." Matilda understood the meaning before he finished speaking. She thought of Hester's smooth answers at breakfast. Bexham's polished certainty. The moment the violinist had asked about the wrong entrance, and neither of them had known what to say, she tightened her fingers around the tuning fork. Rupert's eyes dropped to it. "May I?" The question startled her. "You wish to strike it?" "Only if you permit me." Matilda hesitated, then held it out. He crossed the few feet between them and accepted it carefully, as though she had given him something far more valuable than silver. He struck it once against the wooden edge of the pianoforte. The clear note rang out. He listened until it vanished. Then he handed it back. "I believe it was right." Matilda took it from him. "It usually is." Their eyes met. For the first time since his arrival at Falconhurst, she laughed without immediately wishing to take the sound back. The moment ended when Hester entered with Godfrey Bexham behind her. Bexham carried a folio tied with blue ribbon. His gaze moved from Rupert to Matilda and then to the tuning fork in her hand. "How industrious," he said. "Are we ready to begin?" The musicians arrived within minutes. Hester took her chair near the front, dressed in pale plum silk and expectation. Bexham opened his folio and spread several printers' proofs across a table. "The final variation must be completed before the York announcement is circulated," he said. Matilda looked at him. "Why?" Bexham's expression cooled. "Because printers prefer music to exist before they print it. The announcement is not the music." "No, but public interest requires certainty." Rupert leaned against the mantel, an admirable principle. "We should introduce it to politics." Hester ignored him. "Matilda, play the nocturne first." Lady Penrith praised it particularly. Matilda opened the score. The title page bore Hester's name. Again, she began to play. Halfway through the second page, she saw Rupert glance toward the margin. There, in brown ink, appeared the same descending figure he had seen in the Fantasia. A small rhythmic turn followed it, then another. Matilda had used that pattern for years without thinking. It was the musical equivalent of a signature, a shape her mind returned to whenever she wrote from instinct. Rupert heard it. She knew, because he looked from the page to her left hand, where her smallest finger tapped the same rhythm against the edge of the keyboard, while she waited through a violin rest. Hester did not notice. Bexham did. His expression changed. "Again from the beginning," he said abruptly. Matilda stopped. "Was there an error?" "No, I simply want it cleaner." Rupert looked at him. "How fortunate." For a moment I feared someone had recognized something. Bexham did not answer. Hester rose before the silence could deepen. "Enough. We will return to the Fantasia." She turned to Matilda. "And this time please remember that the final variation must be finished tonight." Matilda looked at the pages before her. "It is not ready." "Then make it ready." Music does not improve because a program requires punctuality. Hester's face hardened. Rupert's brows lifted slightly. Matilda heard her own words and felt the shock of them. She had contradicted Hester openly, not loudly, not dramatically, but she had done it. Before anyone could respond, a footman entered carrying a silver tray. On it lay a freshly printed announcement. Hester took it first, Satisfaction returned to her face. At last. She passed it to Bexham, who smiled. Rupert extended one hand. "May I?" Bexham gave him the card. Rupert read it once, then looked at Matilda. Something in his expression made her stand. "What is it?" He handed her the announcement. Across the top, in bold engraved letters, were the words, "The first public performance of Mrs. Hester Draycott's new Fantasia. York. 3 weeks hence." Matilda read it twice. Then she looked at Hester. "It is not finished." Hester smiled. "Then you had better finish it." Matilda's fingers closed around the card. Beneath another woman's name was the promise of music that did not yet exist. Music only she could write, and for the first time Rupert saw not merely that Matilda knew the composition better than its celebrated author. He saw that the world had already been invited to applaud a theft. Before the final note had even been written, by the evening of the smaller salon, Falconhurst Hall had become a house arranged around a lie. Flowers stood in silver vases. Fresh candles burned in the music room. A dozen influential guests from Yorkshire and York had been invited to hear the Fantasia before its public performance, and Hester received them as though the music had already secured her immortality. Matilda knew every measure of the work. She also knew that the ending remained unfinished. That did not stop Hester from accepting praise. "The central theme came to me quite suddenly," she told Lady Penrith, smiling over the rim of her teacup. "One of those strange moments when one hears something before one understands it." Matilda stood beside the pianoforte, with the score in her hands. She had heard the theme before anyone else in that room, because she had written it before dawn during a rainstorm 2 years earlier. Rupert stood near the mantel, speaking to an elderly baronet while appearing only half attentive to the conversation. Matilda knew better now. He was watching. Not constantly, not obviously, but he noticed things. That had become the most dangerous fact in Falconhurst. Hester's salon began with wine, polite conversation, and admiration offered before a single note had sounded. Bexham moved among the guests with the smooth efficiency of a man selling both art and reputation. He mentioned the York subscription concert. He spoke of advance interest. He assured one gentleman that the printed edition would become highly desirable. No one asked Matilda anything. She was there to play, nothing more. When the guests finally settled, Matilda took her place at the pianoforte. She wore the plain black shoes Mrs. Canning had provided. Her heel remained tender, but it no longer throbbed with every movement. The relief should have made playing easier. Instead, the room felt heavier than usual. Hester sat where everyone could see her. Bexham stood near the music stand. Rupert remained farther back. Matilda placed her hands on the keys. The first movement began. Within moments, the musicians followed her. They watched her breathing. They waited for the smallest movement of her fingers. When the first violinist entered too early, Matilda corrected him with a glance. When the cellist lost the dynamic marking, she guided him back. Hester smiled graciously at the audience, as though this invisible coordination were also hers. Rupert watched the musicians more than the guests. That was how he saw the truth. They obeyed Matilda without hesitation. They trusted her instinctively. When the music stopped, the room filled with praise. Remarkable. So original. Mrs. Draycott, the second theme is extraordinary. Hester lowered her eyes modestly. You are all very kind. A woman in lavender silk asked, how did you conceive the transition into the middle movement? It feels almost like a conversation interrupted and then resumed. Matilda's fingers tightened around the edge of the score. Hester did not hesitate. It came from memory. Of what? A moment from childhood. My mother used to play in the afternoons, and I suppose some fragment remained with me. Matilda stared at the music. The transition had come from nothing of Hester's childhood. It had come from her own. Her father had once described music as argument without cruelty. A statement, an answer, a return. She had built the transition from that idea. Rupert looked at her hands. They had gone still. He said nothing. That silence carried more understanding than any public defense could have. The musicians prepared for the second section. Halfway through, the first violinist stopped. "Forgive me, Miss Draycott, should the phrase not resolve before my entrance." Bexham stepped forward. "Continue as printed." The violinist frowned at his part. "It clashes with the cello, only briefly." Matilda looked at the measure. "No, he is right." Bexham turned to her. "The proof has been approved." "Then the proof contains an error." Hester's expression changed, only slightly. "Enough." Bexham spoke with patient condescension. "Miss Draycott, printers require stability. We cannot revise every passage because a performer grows nervous." The violinist looked offended. Matilda remained calm. "The performer is not nervous. The harmony is unresolved." Bexham's smile thinned. "The music is Mrs. Draycott's." Before Matilda could answer, Rupert's voice came from the back of the room, and yet the orchestra appears to be waiting for Miss Draycott. Every head turned. Rupert walked closer with the unhurried ease of a man who knew no one would stop him. "Please," he said to Matilda, "explain the passage." Bexham opened his mouth. Rupert looked at him. "I had asked Miss Draycott." The words were mild. They still ended the interruption. Matilda looked at the score. The cello descends here. The violin must wait one additional measure, or the phrase interrupts itself before resolution. The later entrance completes the pattern introduced in the first movement. The cellist nodded immediately. "Yes." The violinist lifted his bow. "Exactly." Hester gave a light laugh. "Matilda is very particular about technical matters." Rupert turned toward her. How fortunate for the music. The musicians played the corrected version. It worked. Everyone heard the difference. Even those who did not understand harmony understood ease. The passage breathed. Rupert did not smile triumphantly. He simply looked at Matilda as though the correctness of her answer mattered more than the embarrassment of anyone else. That disturbed her in a way praise did not. Praise could be borrowed, accuracy could not. After the rehearsal, refreshments were served. Matilda stood near a side table with a cup of tea she had not touched. A fashionable widow named Mrs. Alverton approached her. "You are very fortunate, Miss Draycott." Matilda looked up. "Am I? To spend your life so close to real talent?" The words were delivered kindly. That made them worse. In the past, Matilda would have smiled and agreed. She would have made herself smaller to ease the moment. Instead, she said, "Proximity can be educational, madam." "So can observation, Mrs." Alverton blinked. "Indeed." She moved away. Matilda's heart beat harder than it should have. Rupert appeared beside the table a moment later, holding no tea. A dangerous answer. Was it? Very. Someone may begin to suspect you possess opinions. Matilda almost laughed. "I have always possessed them." "Then society has suffered a serious failure of intelligence." She looked at him. "You enjoy making people uncomfortable, only when they arrive too comfortable." Before she could reply, Bexham approached with several printed pages under his arm. "Your Grace, Miss Draycott." His smile was formal now. "I am afraid I must steal our composer for a moment." Matilda felt the insult before she understood it. Bexham had turned toward Hester. Rupert did not look away from Matilda. "How confusing," he said. "I thought the composer had been standing here." Silence. Bexham's face hardened almost as perceptibly. Hester came closer. "Your Grace, you do enjoy your jokes." "Frequently." Rupert's gaze remained on Matilda. "Not always." Hester changed the subject. "The final variation will be finished tonight." Matilda looked at her. "I have not said that." The room around them continued talking, but something inside the small circle tightened. Bexham lowered his voice. "The York edition is already being prepared." "Then it is being prepared from an incomplete manuscript, which is why you will complete it." Matilda's pulse quickened. "I will complete it when the music is ready." Hester's smile disappeared. "Do not be difficult." Rupert said nothing. Matilda understood why. This was hers to answer. She looked at Hester. "I am not being difficult. I am being truthful." Bexham's eyes sharpened. Hester drew a slow breath. "We will discuss this later." She turned away before the exchange could become public. Bexham followed, but not before giving Matilda a look that contained no trace of his earlier charm. Rupert watched them leave. That was brave. Matilda looked down at her untouched tea. It did not feel brave. Most useful courage rarely does. Across the room, Bexham leaned close to Hester and spoke in a low voice. Hester's expression remained controlled, but her fingers tightened around her fan. Rupert noticed. Matilda noticed him noticing. A moment later, Mrs. Canning entered carrying a parcel wrapped in tissue and tied with pale ribbon. She brought it directly to Matilda. From Mrs. Draycott. Matilda opened it. Inside lay a fresh pair of ivory satin slippers. New this time, delicate, narrow, beautiful. Hester's voice carried from across the room. "For York." Matilda lifted one slipper and studied its shape. Her heel gave a faint ache beneath the bandage. The room seemed to wait without knowing it was waiting. Rupert said nothing. That mattered. He did not rescue her from the answer. Matilda placed the slipper back in the tissue. Then she looked at Hester. No. The single word was quiet. It did not shake the chandeliers. It did not stop the clocks. But for Matilda, the world changed anyway. The word remained between them. No. Matilda had spoken it quietly, yet Hester stared at her as though she had shattered something expensive. Around the room, conversations continued, but not convincingly. A few guests had heard. Others had sensed the change in the air. Mrs. Canning stood beside Matilda, with the unopened parcel still between them. Rupert remained near the side table, his expression unreadable except for the faintest lift of one brow. Hester crossed the room slowly. "You will wear them in York." Matilda looked down at the ivory satin slippers. They were delicate, elegant, and narrow enough to make her injured heel ache at the sight of them. Then she looked back at Hester. "No, I won't." This time the contraction came naturally, and the refusal sounded stronger for it. Hester lowered her voice. "Do not make a spectacle of yourself." "I'm not." "Then stop behaving like a child." Matilda felt every old instinct rise at once. Apologize, yield, prevent discomfort. She had obeyed those instincts for years. Now she stood still. "My heel is still healing. Then you will endure one evening." Matilda heard the sentence clearly. So did Rupert. He did not intervene. That mattered more than she expected. He watched her, not Hester, as though the answer belonged entirely to Matilda. She looked at the shoes one last time. "No." Hester's face hardened. "You are forgetting your position." "I know my position very well. Do you?" Hester's gaze moved briefly toward Rupert. "Since His Grace arrived, you seem to have developed surprising ideas about your importance." Matilda felt the cruelty of the remark. It landed exactly where Hester intended. Rupert could have destroyed it with one sentence. He did not. He knew better now than to turn every insult into his own opportunity for rescue. Matilda drew a breath. My importance has nothing to do with his grace. Hester gave a short laugh. Of course not, and neither does my foot. That silenced her. Matilda turned to Mrs. Canning. May I keep the black shoes I wore this afternoon? Mrs. Canning's eyes warmed. They are yours. Thank you. Hester's mouth tightened. You will look absurd beside the other performers. Matilda folded the tissue paper over the ivory slippers. Then I will look absurd while standing without pain. Rupert finally spoke. A bold experiment. Hester turned toward him. Your Grace, choosing footwear according to whether one can walk in it. His tone was mild. Radical, certainly, but perhaps worth observing. A fashionable woman nearby laughed before she realized Hester was not amused. Rupert continued. I confess I had not realized shoes required parliamentary approval. The tension broke around them. A few guests smiled. Hester could not openly challenge him without seeming ridiculous. She lifted her chin. Of course, Miss Draycott may wear whatever she pleases. Matilda knew it was not permission. It was retreat, a small one. Still, it was the first retreat Hester had made because Matilda had refused to move. The realization steadied her. Later that evening, after the guests had gone and the house had settled, Matilda returned to the music room. Mrs. Canning remained in the adjoining passage, sorting household correspondence within sight of the open door. The propriety of the arrangement was obvious and necessary because Rupert was already there. He stood near the pianoforte, examining a stack of rehearsal pages without touching them. I was beginning to suspect you had fled the house, he said. Matilda entered carefully in the black shoes. I considered it. Because of the shoes. Because of people who discuss them. Then I should probably leave at once. She almost smiled. You encouraged the discussion. Only after your answer. You waited. You seemed capable of speaking. His gaze rested on her face. You were. The simplicity of the praise unsettled her more than admiration would have. She moved toward the pianoforte and began arranging the pages for the next day's rehearsal. On top lay the unfinished Fantasia. The final title page was still blank because she had refused to copy Hester's name onto it. Rupert noticed. An omission? A decision? He nodded once. Better. Matilda looked at him. You approve? I suspect my approval is irrelevant. That has not stopped you before. An excellent point. He folded his hands behind his back. Then yes, I approve. She looked down at the blank page. Bexham will not. Mr. Bexham seems disappointed whenever reality fails to be convenient. He can damage my prospects. Rupert's humor faded. I know. Matilda had not expected the seriousness in his voice. Do you? A publisher decides what reaches the public. A patron decides whom to invite. A hostess decides who is respectable. People like Mr. Bexham and Mrs. Draycott survive because each individual act of exclusion looks small. He glanced toward the unfinished score until someone realizes an entire life can be built out of small exclusions. Matilda stared at him. You have thought about this? Since breakfast. That is not very long. I think quickly when irritated. And are you irritated? Profoundly. She smiled despite herself. Rupert saw it and softened. There, evidence of success. I was not aware amusement was your objective, neither was I. The words lingered a moment too long. Matilda looked away first. She sat at the pianoforte and opened the unfinished score. The ending still does not work. Rupert moved no closer than propriety allowed. Because it returns too easily. She looked at him. You remember. I remember most things people say when they are telling the truth." Matilda placed her fingers on the keys and played the opening theme quietly. Then she moved into the final variation, as written. The melody returned in polished repetition. It was beautiful. It was also empty. She stopped. Rupert said, "You dislike it." "I dislike what it says. Music says things, always. And what does this say?" Matilda considered. "That nothing changes. That after everything, the melody returns exactly as it began. A comforting idea. A dishonest one." Rupert looked at her. "You do not believe people return unchanged, do you?" "No." His answer came too quickly to be social performance. Matilda heard it. He realized she had. Neither spoke for a moment. Then she played the opening theme again, softer this time, and altered one note. The change was small, but the harmony shifted around it. Rupert listened. "That is better. It is not finished. Neither are most people." She turned toward him. "That sounds suspiciously wise. Please do not repeat it. I have worked hard to appear frivolous." She laughed. The sound surprised them both. Rupert's expression changed, and for one brief second he looked almost vulnerable. Then footsteps approached from the corridor. Godfrey Bexham entered without ceremony, carrying a stack of newly prepared title pages. Mrs. Canning remained visible beyond the door. Bexham's gaze moved from Rupert to Matilda, then to the blank page on the pianoforte. "Still unfinished?" "Yes," Matilda said. He set the new title pages down. "Then copy these before morning." Matilda looked at the top sheet, a new Fantasia by Mrs. Hester Draycott. Beneath it, in smaller type, was the date of the York preview. Her stomach tightened. "I won't copy that title." Bexham's face went still. Rupert said nothing. Matilda felt his attention, but not his interference. Bexham spoke carefully. "You are employed to prepare manuscripts. I am employed to prepare music. Do not become difficult. I'm becoming precise. You owe your position to Mrs. Draycott." Matilda met his eyes. "That does not make her the composer." Silence. Bexham's expression changed completely. The polished publisher vanished. What remained was cold calculation. "Be careful, Miss Draycott." "I am." She closed the score, for the first time in years. Bexham glanced at Rupert and recovered his smile. "Perhaps fatigue is affecting her judgment," Rupert answered lightly. "Perhaps clarity is affecting yours." Bexham's smile disappeared again. He gathered the title pages but left one behind. "The York preview will proceed." Matilda looked at him. "With an unfinished work, with or without your cooperation." He turned and left. The door closed. Matilda stared at the abandoned page bearing Hester's name. Rupert moved no closer. "What will you do?" he asked. She looked at the unfinished variation, then at the blank title page beside it. For years, other people had answered that question for her. Hester, Bexham, necessity, fear. This time, she placed the printed false title face down. Then she took one handwritten page from the score, folded it carefully, and slipped it inside her reticule. It contained a variation no printed proof had ever seen. "I will keep something that is mine," she said. Rupert looked at the reticule, then at her face. "A beginning." Matilda rested one hand on the closed score. "Perhaps." The following morning, Bexham announced that a private preview would be held in York within the week. Hester smiled, as though victory had already been arranged. Matilda stood in her plain black shoes and understood the truth at once. The next attack would not happen behind a closed door. It would happen before witnesses powerful enough to decide, with a few murmured words, whether she was a composer, a copyist, or a woman who had reached above her station and deserved to fall. The private preview in York began with rain against tall windows and a room full of people who believed they had come to judge music. Matilda knew better. They had come to judge her. The assembly room had been arranged for elegance rather than comfort. Rows of gilt chairs faced a small platform where a pianoforte stood beneath candlelight. Wealthy subscribers from York sat beside county families from Yorkshire, their programmes folded on their laps. Hester occupied a place of honour near the front in dark blue silk. Godfrey Bexham moved between guests with the ease of a man who had already decided how the evening would be remembered. Rupert stood near one of the side columns, neither hiding nor claiming the centre. Matilda noticed him before she wished to. He had kept his distance throughout the journey and the hours before the preview, never forcing conversation, never asking whether she was afraid. She was grateful for that. Fear was difficult enough without being required to describe it. Her heel had nearly healed. She wore the same plain black shoes she had chosen at Falconhurst. Hester had seen them and said nothing, which was more threatening than criticism. The musicians tuned. Matilda took her place at the pianoforte. The score rested before her. Across the top of the printed programme, in elegant lettering, stood the words, "A new Fantasia by Mrs. Hester Draycott." Matilda looked at the name once. Then she lowered her eyes to the keys. The first movement began. She played steadily. The quartet followed. The music filled the room, bright at first, then restless, then quiet enough that every listener leaned forward. Matilda knew where each phrase came from. She knew which measure had been born during a storm, which transition had taken 3 failed attempts, which melody her father would have understood. Hester sat beneath the admiration as though it were sunlight intended for her. Matilda played on. The second movement ended. There was polite applause. Bexham stepped forward to introduce the incomplete final section, carefully avoiding the fact that it was unfinished. "Mrs. Draycott has chosen to allow a select audience to hear the work before its final publication," he said. "A privilege I am sure you will all appreciate." Hester smiled. Matilda remained seated. One of the violinists, a serious young man named Mr. Ellison, adjusted his music and frowned. "Miss Draycott," he said quietly, "the passage before the final return. Should the violin enter after the suspension or with it?" Matilda turned toward him. "After it," Hester answered at the same moment. "With it." The room did not become silent at once. It changed by degrees. A fan stopped moving. Someone coughed. Bexham's face tightened. Mr. Ellison looked between the 2 women. Matilda could have withdrawn. She could have said she had misunderstood. She had done such things before. Instead, she said, "The harmony does not resolve if you enter with it." Hester laughed softly. Matilda has always been very conscientious about details. "This is not a detail," Matilda said. Hester's smile remained. No, no. The word carried farther than Matilda expected. Bexham stepped forward. "We need not trouble our guests with technical discussion." Rupert's voice came from the side of the room. "Some of us enjoy being troubled." A few guests smiled. Bexham did not. Hester turned toward Matilda with an expression of patient concern. "My dear, perhaps you are tired." Matilda felt the insult arrive dressed as kindness. "I am not. You have been under strain since the unfortunate incident at Falconhurst." Hester glanced toward several guests who had heard the gossip. "And one cannot blame you for becoming confused about the difference between copying and composing." The sentence landed cleanly. Matilda felt it in the room before she felt it in herself. A woman in the second row lowered her fan. Mr. Ellison looked at Matilda with sudden discomfort. Bexham moved quickly. He lifted a printed proof from the table beside him. "There has been some misunderstanding," he said. "Miss Draycott has assisted with copying and corrections. Valuable work, certainly, but assistance can sometimes lead a person to imagine ownership where none exists." Rupert straightened. Matilda looked at the proof in Bexam's hand. Hester's name appeared at the top. Of course it did. Every printed page did. Hester folded her hands. "I had hoped to handle this privately." Her voice was sorrowful now. "Since His Grace began paying particular attention to Matilda after her injured foot, she has developed ideas that would never have occurred to her before." Several heads turned toward Rupert. There it was. Not an accusation of seduction. Something more careful. Hester was suggesting vanity. That ducal attention had made Matilda imagine herself talented, important, perhaps even equal to the woman who employed her. Matilda's heart began to pound. She could hear it between the small sounds of the room. Bexam continued. "No one questions Miss Draycott's diligence, but diligence is not authorship." Matilda looked down at her hands. They were steady. That surprised her. She had thought fear would make them tremble. Across the room, Rupert had not moved. He was watching her, not Hester. Waiting. The waiting mattered. He had not spoken for her. He had not rescued her before she chose whether to stand. Hester's voice softened. "Matilda, end this now. Say plainly that the music is mine." The room held its breath. Matilda remembered the ivory slippers. She remembered blood beneath the pianoforte. She remembered the blank title page she had refused to fill. She remembered taking one handwritten variation and placing it in her reticule because for once she had decided to keep something that belonged to her. She lifted her head. "I have never mistaken copying for composition." Hester's eyes narrowed. "Then say it." Matilda looked directly at her. No, the word did not echo. It did not need to. Hester's composure cracked by the smallest degree. Bexam spoke at once. "Be careful, Miss Draycott. A public accusation against a respectable patroness can ruin a woman in your position. I have made no accusation." "You are implying one." "I said no." Matilda's voice remained calm. "You may decide what you imagine beyond that." A murmur moved through the room. Rupert finally stepped forward. "Miss Draycott has made one statement. I suggest we acquire the discipline to hear it before inventing 5 others." Bexam turned toward him. "Your Grace, with respect, you are unfamiliar with the professional arrangements involved." "Then explain them. This is neither the time nor place." Rupert glanced around the room. Odd. It seemed an excellent place a moment ago, when Miss Draycott's character was being discussed. Hester rose. "No one is attacking her character." Matilda looked at her. "You said I had become confused because a duke noticed me." Hester's mouth tightened. "I was defending you. From what?" Hester had no answer ready. That was the first fracture. Small but visible. Mr. Ellison still held his violin. He looked toward the proof in Bexam's hand. "The final variation," he said slowly. "The printed copy ends 4 pages before Miss Draycott's rehearsal draft." Bexam turned on him. "That is irrelevant." Matilda felt her pulse change. 4 pages. The page she had preserved. The unfinished ending. Rupert heard the significance too. His gaze moved to her. Bexam lowered the proof. "This evening has become regrettable." "No," Matilda said. Everyone looked at her. She rose from the pianoforte bench. "It has become clear." Hester's face went pale with anger. "Sit down." Matilda remained standing. Rupert took one step toward her, then stopped. "Would you like to leave?" he asked. The question was quiet. Matilda looked at the doors. Every part of her wanted to walk through them. She could escape the stairs, She could postpone the judgment. She could become invisible again. Instead, she said, "Not yet." Rupert inclined his head. He did not touch her. He simply remained where she could see him. Bexham gathered the proofs sharply. "The preview is concluded." "Because the music is unfinished?" Rupert asked. Bexham ignored him. Hester turned toward the guests with a strained smile and began apologizing for the disturbance. The room broke into whispers. Matilda stood beside the pianoforte while her reputation was divided into pieces around her. Ambitious, confused, encouraged beyond her station, perhaps clever, perhaps dishonest, perhaps dangerous. She let them whisper. She had survived silence. She could survive being heard incorrectly for one night. When she finally moved toward the door, it was because she chose to. Rupert walked beside her at a respectful distance. In the corridor, away from the crowd, he said, "You were right." Matilda did not look at him. "About what?" "The ending." She stopped. "What about it?" "It cannot return unchanged." For one moment, the pressure in her chest loosened. Then a servant approached hurriedly from the far end of the corridor, carrying a sealed note for Rupert. He opened it, read once, and his expression changed. Matilda saw decision settle over him. She did not yet understand that before the night was over, he would make a mistake large enough to wound the trust between them. She only knew that by morning the York premiere would be cancelled, the publication would be suspended, and once again a powerful person would decide that the safest place for Matilda Draycott was silence. By 9 the next morning, Matilda knew something had gone wrong. The breakfast room at the York lodging house was nearly empty when the first note arrived. Mrs. Albright, the widow with whom Matilda was staying, carried it in on a small silver tray and set it beside the untouched toast. "From Mr. Bexham's office," she said. Matilda broke the seal. The message contained only 3 sentences. The public premiere was suspended. Publication had been halted. Further notice would follow. She read it twice. Then a third time. The words did not change. Mrs. Albright watched from across the table. "Bad news?" Matilda folded the note. "I don't know yet." That was not true. Some part of her already knew. The cancellation was too sudden. Bexham would never willingly abandon a profitable program. Hester would never surrender public admiration without a fight. Someone with greater social influence had intervened. Matilda rose so quickly that the chair legs scraped the floor. "I need to see His Grace." Mrs. Albright's brows lifted. "Alone? No. Of course not." Matilda steadied herself. "With you present, if you are willing." The widow studied her face and nodded. "I am." Rupert arrived before Matilda could send for him. He entered the front parlour 10 minutes later, formally announced and visibly composed. Mrs. Albright remained near the window with her embroidery. The arrangement was proper. Safe. Matilda stood beside the fireplace with Bexham's note in her hand. Rupert saw it. Something in his expression told her the truth before he spoke. "You know," she said. "Yes." "Did you do this?" He did not pretend misunderstanding. "I suspended my patronage." Her fingers tightened around the paper. "And because your name was attached to the concert, the premiere was cancelled." "Yes." "And the publication?" "Bexham depends heavily on subscribers who take their lead from certain families. I made my concerns known." Matilda stared at him. He was still speaking with calm honesty, as though facts could make the injury smaller. "You cancelled it." "I stopped them from using your work while the authorship is disputed. You cancelled it." This time her voice was sharper. Mrs. Albright lowered her embroidery but said nothing. Rupert's expression changed. "Yes." Matilda walked to the center of the room and placed Bexham's note on the table between them without asking me. You had just been publicly humiliated. That is not an answer. I thought removing the performance would prevent further damage. To whom? Rupert went still. Matilda felt heat rise in her chest. Not panic, not shame, anger, clean and frightening. She had spent years swallowing anger because other people always seemed to possess more urgent feelings than she did. Hester's embarrassment, Bexham's impatience, the comfort of guests, the convenience of musicians. Now Rupert had joined them, not in cruelty, but in certainty. You stopped them from using my music, she said. Yes. You also stopped me from being heard. His eyes met hers. For the first time since she had known him, he had no quick answer. Matilda continued. Do you know what Hester will say now? I can guess. She will say the premiere was cancelled because I became unstable. Bexham will say the publication stopped because I created confusion. The guests from last night will repeat that a duke noticed me, and suddenly I imagined myself important enough to claim another woman's work. Rupert looked toward the note. I can correct that. With another announcement, if necessary. And then what? You will tell them which parts of my life they are permitted to believe. His jaw tightened. That is not what I intended. I know. Her voice softened, and somehow that made the moment worse. That is the problem. Silence filled the parlor. Matilda could hear the faint movement of carriage wheels beyond the window. Rupert looked at her as though he had finally understood that good intentions could still leave a bruise no one else saw. I thought I was removing the weapon from their hands, he said. You removed the instrument from mine. The words landed between them. Rupert lowered his gaze briefly. When he looked up again, the wit was gone. So was the easy confidence. You are right. Matilda had expected resistance, explanation, perhaps even offense. His agreement unsettled her. I should have asked, he said. Yes, I should have trusted that you knew what the concert meant. Yes, and I did not. Matilda looked away. The admission mattered. It did not repair anything. Not yet. Rupert took one step closer, then stopped well before propriety or choice could be questioned. Tell me what you need me to do. She almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. Nothing. His face changed slightly. Nothing? Not yet. He accepted that too. It would have been easier if he had argued. Matilda picked up the note and folded it once. I need to think without someone more powerful deciding what is safest for me. Rupert's expression tightened at the truth of it. Then I will leave. She looked at him. Thank you. It was not forgiveness. They both knew it. He bowed to Mrs. Albright, then to Matilda. Before he reached the door, she said, Your Grace. He turned. I am not angry because you failed to save me. His eyes held hers. I am angry because I did not ask to be saved. Rupert stood very still, understood. Then he left. By afternoon, Hester's version of events had already begun circulating. Matilda learned this from a calling card delivered with a note written by a woman who had attended the preview. The wording was polite enough to wound efficiently. She hoped Miss Draycott was recovering from her recent excitement. She trusted that rest would restore perspective. She regretted that the concert had been disrupted by unfortunate misunderstandings. Matilda read the note once and placed it face down. There it was, exactly as predicted. Her resistance had become excitement. Her authorship had become confusion. Her humiliation had become a misunderstanding. She opened her reticule and removed the handwritten page she had taken from the score at Falconhurst. The variation no printed proof contained. She unfolded it across the table. The music was incomplete, but the structure was there. Hester did not know it. Bexham had never seen it. The published version stopped before this page began. Matilda stared at the measures until an idea formed. If Bexham had only the incomplete manuscript, then his own proof might become evidence. If Hester claimed the work as hers, why could she not produce the ending? If the missing variation existed only in Matilda's hand, then perhaps the silence surrounding her was not as complete as everyone believed. Mrs. Albright entered with tea and found Matilda surrounded by paper. "You look different," she said. Matilda glanced up. "Do I? Yes." The widow set down the tray, less frightened. Matilda looked at the unfinished variation. "I am still frightened. That is not the same thing." Matilda thought of her father's tuning fork. A true note did not become false because a crowded room preferred another. She had spent too long waiting for the crowd to become fair. Perhaps fairness would never arrive voluntarily. By evening, she had made a decision. She returned to Falconhurst the next morning, not as a defeated dependent, but as a woman collecting what belonged to her. Mrs. Canning met her in the entrance hall. Hester was in the drawing room. Bexham was expected before luncheon. Rupert was still in York. Matilda felt relief at that. She was not ready to see him again. She went upstairs, packed her clothes, gathered her father's letters, the silver tuning fork, and every manuscript page in her own hand that she could legally claim. Then she entered the music room one last time. Hester stood beside the pianoforte. "What are you doing?" "Leaving." Hester's face changed. "Do not be absurd." "I am not. You have nowhere respectable to go. I have already arranged lodgings." "With what money?" "My own." Hester laughed once. "You think 1 week of attention from a duke has made you independent?" Matilda looked at her. "No. I think years of dependence have made me tired." Hester's voice sharpened. "If you walk out of this house, I will not provide a reference." Matilda had known the threat would come. It still hurt. "Then you will not." Hester stared at her, finally understanding that the old lever no longer moved anything. Matilda placed the blank title page on the pianoforte. "You may keep your program." She touched the reticule holding the unfinished variation. "I am keeping my music." When she stepped outside, a hired carriage waited beyond the front steps. Rupert stood beside it. Matilda stopped. "I told you not to act." "I have not." "Then why are you here?" "Because I heard you were leaving, and I thought you might need to say something to me before." "You did." She almost smiled at the careful wording. "Almost. Do not follow me until I ask." Rupert held her gaze. The old Rupert might have answered with charm. The Duke might have offered protection. Instead, he simply said, "I won't." Matilda entered the carriage. As it pulled away from Falconhurst, she looked back once. Rupert remained where she had left him. He did not follow. For the first time, his restraint felt more powerful than his rank. York did not feel like freedom at first. It felt like a rented room with pale wallpaper, a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking a street busy enough that no one noticed when Matilda Draycott arrived with 2 trunks, a reticule full of music, and no certainty about what would happen next. She took lodgings in the respectable house of Mrs. Albright, the same widow who had chaperoned her meeting with Rupert after the cancelled premiere. The arrangement was modest, proper, and entirely her own. That mattered. On the first evening, Matilda closed her bedroom door, turned the key, and stood in the quiet. No one called her downstairs. No manuscript appeared beside her supper plate. No voice reminded her what she owed. The silence felt strange. Then it felt enormous. She sat at the small writing desk and emptied her reticule, her father's silver tuning fork. 3 folded pages in her own hand, the unfinished variation she had taken from Falconhurst, a handful of notes from musicians, 1 printed proof bearing Hester's name. Matilda arranged them carefully. Freedom, she discovered, was not beautiful at first. It was work. The next morning she began. She visited a music shop where one of the violinists from the Falconhurst rehearsals had once purchased strings. She asked for the address of the printer who had prepared Bexham's proofs. She wrote to 2 musicians who had attended earlier rehearsals. She returned to the York Assembly Room and spoke with the caretaker about dates. She did not accuse. She asked questions. Dates were safer than outrage. Paper was quieter than gossip. By the 3rd day she had built a timeline. The earliest proof delivered to Bexham's printer ended exactly where Matilda had stopped copying from her working manuscript. No later completed version existed in the printer's records. That alone did not prove authorship. A copyist could copy incomplete pages, but it proved something else. Hester could not have supplied a complete work because no complete work had been delivered. The final variation existed only in Matilda's own hand. She stared at the dates until her pulse quickened. There was more. Mr. Ellison, the violinist from the private preview, agreed to meet her in the public room of Mrs. Albright's house, with the widow present. He brought 2 old rehearsal parts. Both contained corrections in Matilda's handwriting, made weeks before Hester had publicly described the corresponding passages as her own inspiration. "I remember these," he said, placing the pages on the table. "You changed the entrance after I complained. The line felt crowded." "I did." Mrs. Draycott was not in the room. Matilda looked at him. "Would you say that before others?" He hesitated. The pause was honest, and she respected it more than false courage. If necessary, it may be. He looked down at the music. Then yes. After he left, Matilda sat very still. Mrs. Albright poured tea. "You have 1 witness. 1 witness is not enough." "No, but it is more than none." Matilda almost smiled. "You are very practical. Widowhood encourages it." The next letter arrived that afternoon. It bore Godfrey Bexham's seal. The message was polite. That made it worse. He warned that public claims against Mrs. Draycott could permanently damage Matilda's prospects. He reminded her that publishers depended upon reputation, discretion, and the confidence of patrons. He advised her, for her own sake, to accept that correction and composition were not the same skill. Matilda read the letter once, then again. In the past, such a message would have frightened her into silence. Now she saw the fear inside it. Bexham was not writing because he felt secure. He was writing because she had left Falconhurst with something he did not control. She folded the letter and placed it beside the incomplete proof. Mrs. Albright looked up from her needlework. "Bad news, a threat pretending to be advice. Those are common, are they, among people who benefit from obedience?" Matilda looked at her. The widow continued stitching. "You should write that down. I am a composer, not a philosopher. Today, perhaps you can be both." Matilda did write it down, though not as philosophy. She wrote it in the margin of her private notes. Bexham fears public contradiction. That evening, she finally opened Rupert's letter. It had arrived the previous day and remained unopened on her desk because she had not trusted herself to read it. The envelope carried no ducal crest, only her name. Inside was one page. "I will not ask where you are. When you decide I may be useful, tell me how. Nothing more." Matilda read it twice, then a third time. He had done what she asked. He had not followed. He had not sent money, advice, protection, or a solution. He had left the choice with her. The restraint touched something more vulnerable than apology had. She folded the letter and placed it beneath the silver tuning fork. For 2 more days, she said nothing. She worked. She visited the printer's office with Mrs. Albright as companion and examined the order ledger. Bexham's instructions had arrived on a Monday. The proof had been set from an incomplete copy. No replacement ending had followed. The printer remembered being told that the final pages would be supplied later. They never were. Matilda asked him whether he would confirm that fact if formally requested. He rubbed his chin. "I don't want trouble with Mr. Bexham. Neither do I. Yet here you are." "Yes." He looked at her for a long moment. "Then, if asked properly, I'll tell the truth. Another piece. Not enough. More than before." She also found a dated invoice for copying work submitted under her own initials. It covered the exact week in which the second movement had been revised. Hester had publicly claimed to have finished that movement months earlier. The contradiction was small, useful. Matilda gathered everything into a single folder. By then, York society had begun whispering. She saw it in the way 2 women stopped talking when she entered a shop. She heard it in the careful tone of a note from a former acquaintance asking whether she was quite recovered from recent agitation. She understood the danger. If she failed publicly, she would not simply lose a dispute. She could lose respectable employment entirely. That night, fear returned. It sat with her at the desk and watched while she stared at the unfinished variation. She imagined Hester's confidence, Bexham's polished voice, Rupert's title, her own name without money or influence behind it. Then she remembered the music room at Falconhurst, the ivory slippers, the blood, the applause for someone else. She touched the silver tuning fork, but did not strike it. She did not need the note. She remembered it. A true note did not become false because a crowded room preferred another. The next morning, Matilda finished the final variation. Not quickly, not dramatically. She worked for 5 hours. She changed 4 measures, removed an ornamental passage, and rewrote the return of the main theme so that it came back altered by everything that had happened before. When she played the last chord on Mrs. Albright's small pianoforte, she knew. The ending was hers, fully hers. She copied the complete score in her own hand and sealed the pages in brown paper. Then she sat for a long moment with Rupert's letter beside her. Mrs. Albright entered quietly. "Have you decided something?" Matilda looked at the sealed score. "Yes. About the music. About whom I can trust with it." The widow said nothing. Matilda pulled a clean sheet of paper toward her. She began to write. The message was brief. Rupert had learned, at last, that usefulness was not the same as authority. She was ready to test whether he understood the difference. She folded the note, sealed it, and addressed it to the Duke of Wexbourne. Mrs. Albright glanced at the page. "Only 6 words," Matilda nodded. "They are enough." The note read, "Come, bring no solution with you." She watched the servant carry it away. Then she returned to the sealed score. Somewhere beyond the narrow window, carriage wheels moved through York. Printers worked. Musicians rehearsed. Hester was almost certainly planning her next move. Bexham was almost certainly preparing another warning. Matilda was still afraid, but she was no longer waiting for courage to arrive before acting. She had her father's tuning fork, an unfinished reputation, 1 complete score, 2 reluctant witnesses, and the truth. For the first time in years, that felt like a beginning. Rupert arrived the following afternoon carrying nothing but his hat and gloves. No box, no flowers, no papers, no proposal disguised as protection. Matilda noticed all of that before she noticed how tired he looked. Mrs. Albright received him in the front parlour, where the curtains had been drawn back to admit the pale autumn light. She took her usual chair near the window with her embroidery and made no attempt to hide the fact that she intended to hear enough to preserve propriety. Rupert bowed to her, then to Matilda. "Miss Draycott." "Your Grace." For one moment, neither of them spoke. Matilda had imagined this meeting several times since sending the note. In some versions he arrived with apologies, in others with explanations. In none had she expected silence. Rupert broke it first. "You asked me to bring no solution. I did. I have obeyed. So far." The corner of his mouth moved, a cautious endorsement. Matilda looked at the table between them. The sealed score lay there, wrapped in brown paper and tied with plain string. Beside it rested her father's silver tuning fork. Rupert's gaze followed hers, but did not linger. "What would you like me to do?" he asked. The question was simple. It still struck her with more force than it should have. A week earlier, he would have acted first. Now he waited. Matilda sat opposite him. "I need you to carry something." "Where?" "To an independent solicitor in York. Not one connected to you, Hester, or Bexham." Rupert nodded. "Very well. You are not to open it." His eyes returned to the sealed packet. "I see. Do you? You are asking me to transport evidence without examining it." "Yes, and to place it in witnessed custody." Matilda looked at him sharply. "You understand quickly." "Occasionally. It is one of my more irritating qualities." Mrs. Albright lowered her head over her embroidery. Matilda suspected she was hiding a smile. "The packet contains the only complete score," Matilda said. "The final variation is inside." Rupert's expression changed, but he did not reach for it. "The one Bexham has never seen." "Yes, and Hester cannot produce." "Yes." He remained very still. Matilda continued. "If the score is placed with a solicitor now, sealed and witnessed, then no one can later say, 'I wrote the ending,' after the accusation began." Rupert looked at the packet again. "Sensible, necessary, more than sensible, then." Matilda studied him. "You are not curious." "Profoundly. But you will not open it. You have asked me not to." "That did not stop you from cancelling the concert." The words came out more sharply than she intended. Rupert accepted them without flinching. "No." Silence followed. Then he said, "That was wrong." Matilda looked away. She had heard him admit it before, but the repetition mattered because he offered no excuse with it. Rupert rested his gloves on one knee. "I cannot undo what I did. I can, however, avoid repeating it. That remains to be seen, then test me." She looked at him. The humor in his voice was gone. He meant it. Matilda picked up the sealed packet and held it out. Rupert did not take it immediately. "Do you wish me to choose the solicitor?" "No. Mrs. Albright has recommended Mr. Harrowby in Stonegate. He acted for her husband's estate and has no connection to Falconhurst." Rupert inclined his head. "Then, Mr. Harrowby, you will give him this packet. He must record the condition of the seal, the date, and your delivery. He must keep it unopened until I request it in writing." "Understood. And you are not to read the contents." Rupert met her eyes. "You have made that point with admirable clarity." Matilda almost smiled. "I do not wish there to be any confusion." "Neither do I." This time, when she held out the packet, he accepted it, carefully. No flourish, no declaration. He simply took the most important thing she possessed and placed it beneath his arm. Matilda felt fear immediately. The sensation was so strong that she almost asked for it back. Rupert saw something in her face. "You may change your mind." That stopped her. "What?" "You may decide not to entrust it to me." I have already handed it to you. That does not make the choice irreversible. Matilda looked at the packet, then at him. No, take it. Rupert nodded once. Very well, he rose. I will return with the solicitor's receipt. You need not return today. I know. Then why would you? His expression softened. Because I suspect you will want to know whether the seal remained intact. She had no answer to that. Rupert bowed to Mrs. Albright and left. The room felt strangely empty after he had gone. Mrs. Albright continued stitching for several seconds before speaking. He did not ask what was inside. He knows. He knows part of it. Matilda touched the tuning fork. Enough, perhaps. The widow glanced toward the door. Trust is a difficult thing when one has been trained to expect a price. Matilda looked at her. You make everything sound simple. Nothing is simple. That is why one should recognize the rare simple truth when it appears. Matilda did not ask what truth she meant. She was not sure she wanted the answer. Rupert returned 3 hours later. Dusk had begun to gather beyond the windows. Mrs. Albright ordered lamps lit and remained in the room when he was announced. He carried a single folded receipt. Nothing else. The sealed packet was gone. Matilda stood before she realized she had done so. Rupert crossed the room and handed her the paper. Mr. Harrowby has the score. He recorded the date, time, seal condition, and my name as the person delivering it. He has also confirmed in writing that the packet remained unopened. Matilda read the receipt carefully. Every detail was there. She looked up. You did not open it. Rupert's brows lifted. That appears to be the central achievement of my afternoon. You could have. Yes. No one would have known. You would have, not necessarily. I would have. The certainty in his voice silenced her. Rupert stepped back, giving her space. And I would have known. Matilda folded the receipt. Something inside her shifted. It was small, fragile, not forgiveness, not yet, but trust had returned by one narrow degree. Thank you, she said. I have done less than you deserved. No. Rupert looked at her. Matilda held the receipt between both hands. This time, you did exactly what I asked. He went still. The words seemed to matter more to him than praise would have. Then I am learning. Slowly, cruel, accurate. His smile returned, faint but real. Mrs. Albright rose and announced that tea would be served. The tension eased enough for Matilda to breathe. Rupert stayed only 20 minutes. He asked no questions about the final variation. He made no suggestion about what came next. When he left, Matilda realized she had wanted him to stay longer. That frightened her almost as much as trusting him had. The following morning, the danger returned. A messenger arrived before breakfast with a printed program fresh from the press. Mrs. Albright carried it into the dining room with a troubled expression. This was delivered for you. Matilda unfolded it. Rupert had been right to leave the score with Mr. Harrowby. Bexham had moved faster than either of them expected. Across the top of the program, in bold black letters, were the words, "A new Fantasia composed by Mrs. Hester Draycott." Beneath them appeared the date and place of a public subscription concert in York. Tomorrow evening, Matilda read the announcement twice. Then she saw the line printed near the bottom. The work would be performed in full. Impossible. Bexham did not possess the final variation. Hester could not compose it, yet the program promised a complete performance. Mrs. Albright sat opposite her. What does it mean? Matilda folded the paper carefully. It means they are going to perform an ending they do not have. Can they? Matilda looked toward the window where the morning light touched the rooftops of York. They can try. A knock sounded at the door. Another messenger. This one carried a note from Rupert. Matilda opened it. Only one sentence. "Tell me where you wish me to stand." She read it once, then took up her pen. Her answer came without hesitation. "Where I can see you, not where anyone can mistake your title for my proof." She sealed the note and gave it to the messenger. Then she turned back to the printed program. Hester had taken her name. Bexham had taken her work. Rupert had once tried to take away the danger by taking away her chance to speak. Tomorrow, all of them would stand in the same room, but the complete score rested sealed with an independent solicitor, and the final variations existed only because Matilda had written it. For the first time, the truth did not depend on whether anyone chose to believe her. It was waiting in silence, and this time, silence belonged to her. By noon, York had already begun repeating Hester's version of the story. Matilda learned this from Mrs. Albright, who returned from a morning call with 2 calling cards, 1 folded note, and the careful expression of a woman deciding how much truth another person could bear at once. "Tell me," Matilda said. Mrs. Albright removed her gloves. "Mrs. Draycott has been very busy." Matilda looked at the printed program on the table. "Of course she has. She has told several subscribers that you are a talented copyist who became confused about the difference between helping with music and creating it." Matilda said nothing. Mrs. Albright continued. "She has also suggested that His Grace's attention encouraged the confusion." That part did not surprise Matilda any more. Hester had found the cleanest weapon available, not scandal. Vanity. A woman in Matilda's position might be forgiven for pain. She would not be forgiven for ambition. "And Bexham?" Matilda asked. "He has circulated the program everywhere." Mrs. Albright sat opposite her. "He appears determined that the concert proceed tonight." Matilda rested one hand on the table. "Then he is afraid." "You sound very certain. People who are certain do not rush." A knock sounded at the front door. Moments later, the maid entered carrying a long envelope addressed in Bexham's hand. Matilda broke the seal. Inside lay a single manuscript page, her manuscript page. At least, that was what Bexham wanted her to believe. Across the top, in a brief covering note, he had written that the enclosed copy demonstrated the obvious truth. Matilda's handwriting proved she had served as copyist. Nothing more. She placed the note aside and examined the page. Mrs. Albright waited. "Is it yours?" "Partly." Matilda leaned closer. The main passage was unquestionably in her hand. She remembered writing it nearly a year earlier, but one correction had been inserted above the stave in darker ink. The altered note created the same awkward technical error that later appeared in Hester's printed edition. Matilda's original draft had not contained it. Someone had changed the page after she wrote it. She felt a slow, steady, calm replace fear. "He has made a mistake." Mrs. Albright looked up. "What kind?" Matilda pointed to the correction. "This is not my ink." "Can that be proved?" "Perhaps not by ink alone. But this correction creates the exact error Mr. Ellison questioned at the preview. My earlier rehearsal part does not contain it." She moved quickly to her folder and found the older copy. The passage resolved cleanly. No added correction, no technical flaw. Mrs. Albright looked from one page to the other. "Then, why send this to you?" "Because he thinks the sight of my own handwriting will frighten me." Matilda sat back. "He still believes I am more afraid of accusation than he is of examination." Another knock came before she could say more. This time the visitor was Mr. Ellison. He entered the parlor with rein on his coat shoulders and his violin case in one hand. Mrs. Albright remained present, preserving propriety. The musician looked uncomfortable, but not uncertain. Miss Draycott I received word that tonight's concert will proceed. Yes, and that Mrs. Draycott intends to make a statement before the performance. Matilda's stomach tightened. I expected something of the kind. Mr. Ellison placed his case beside the chair. I want you to know that if asked, I'll say what I remember. Matilda looked at him. You understand what that may cost? Some invitations, perhaps. He gave a nervous smile. I have lost worse things. You do not owe me this. No, but I owe the truth something. He opened the folder he carried and removed 2 old rehearsal parts. You taught me this passage before Mrs. Draycott ever publicly claimed the piece. I remember because I argued with you for 10 minutes. Despite herself, Matilda smiled. 15. Then I stand corrected twice. He laid the pages on the table. My notes are dated. Matilda looked at the penciled markings. Her own corrections ran through the margins. The date preceded Hester's public announcement by months. Will you say this before witnesses? Matilda asked. Mr. Ellison hesitated only once. Yes. When he left, Matilda stood by the window and watched the rain streak the glass. She had the incomplete printer's proof, the altered manuscript page, the earlier rehearsal copy, the dated notes, Mr. Ellison's testimony, and the complete score sealed with Mr. Harrowby. The proof was no longer a single fragile thread. It was becoming a chain. Yet Hester still had reputation. Bexham still had access. The room tonight would be filled with people who knew their names and barely knew hers. Mrs. Albright came to stand several feet away. You can still choose not to go. Matilda looked at her. I know. No one could call you cowardly. Someone would. Someone always does. Matilda returned her gaze to the rain. That is not why I have to go. She thought of the black shoes, the blank title page, the final variation. She thought of the moment she had told Hester no, and the strange discovery that the walls had not fallen. If I stay away, Hester will speak for me again. And if you go, then at least one voice in the room will be mine. A maid entered carrying a parcel wrapped in brown paper. From Falconhurst Hall, miss. Matilda froze. The handwriting on the label belonged to Mrs. Canning. She opened the parcel carefully. Inside was a small wooden box. For a moment, she did not understand. Then she lifted the lid. The ivory satin slipper lay within, faintly stained where the blood had dried into the fabric. Matilda's breath caught. Beneath it was a short note from Mrs. Canning. You once asked that no servant be blamed for your pain. Perhaps it is time no one blamed you for surviving it. Matilda closed her eyes. The slipper was not proof of authorship. It would not establish a date, a melody, or a printed fraud. But it proved something else. It proved the cost of her silence. Mrs. Albright said quietly, Will you take it? Matilda looked at the shoe. Once, she would have hidden it. She would have feared that others might call it theatrical. Hester certainly would. Bexham might. But Matilda no longer wished to protect cruel people from the sight of consequences. Yes, she said. It belongs in the room. Rupert arrived late in the afternoon. He did not enter until Mrs. Albright was present. He carried no plan in his hands, only his hat and a grave expression. Matilda showed him the altered page, the earlier rehearsal copy, and Mr. Ellison's dated notes. He listened. He did not interrupt. When she finished, he asked, What would you like me to arrange? Seats for the witnesses, nothing more. And Mr. Harrowby, he must bring the sealed score only when I ask for it. Understood. If Bexham tries to remove papers, stop him. Rupert nodded. That I can do. Matilda studied him. And if the room turns against me? His face changed. What do you want me to do? The question mattered more than any promise. Stay where I can see you. Only that, until I ask for more. He bowed his head. then that is what I will do." Silence settled between them. The concert waited only hours away. Matilda knew there was something else she wanted to say, but fear and restraint tangled around it. Rupert seemed to sense the same thing. He took one step nearer, then stopped. "May I take your hand?" he asked. Matilda looked at him. No one had ever made such a small request feel so serious. She held out her hand. Rupert took it gently. No kiss, no grand declaration, only warmth, steady and careful. "You don't have to prove your worth tonight," he said. Matilda looked at their joined hands, then at him. "No," her voice was calm now, "but I intend to prove my name." Rupert's fingers tightened once, then released her when she withdrew. By evening the rain had stopped. The carriage waited outside. Mrs. Albright helped Matilda fasten her cloak. The wooden box containing the bloodied slipper rested beside the folder of documents. Her father's silver tuning fork lay in her reticule. Somewhere across York, Hester was preparing to be admired. Bexham was preparing to control the story. Matilda was preparing for something else. She was preparing to stand in a room filled with people who had already been told what to think of her and ask them to listen anyway. When the carriage reached the assembly room, music was already sounding within. The orchestra was tuning. Candles glowed behind the windows. Guests climbed the steps beneath umbrellas and darkening skies. Matilda stepped down from the carriage in her plain black shoes. Rupert stood several yards away, exactly where she had asked. He did not come forward. He simply met her eyes. Matilda entered the building, carrying the music everyone believed belonged to another woman, the evidence that it did not, and the one thing Hester had spent years teaching her never to bring into a crowded room, her own voice. The York Assembly Room was already full when Matilda entered, and for one brief moment, the force of so many eyes nearly drove her back toward the door. Candlelight glowed from chandeliers overhead. The orchestra was tuning beneath a painted ceiling. County families, wealthy subscribers, musicians, patrons, and curious guests filled every row. Hester sat near the front in deep blue silk, composed and radiant beneath the admiration she expected to receive. Godfrey Bexham moved along the aisle with a printed program in one hand and the confidence of a man who believed the ending had already been written in his favor. Rupert stood where Matilda had asked him to stand. Not beside the platform, not at the center, near the side wall, several yards from the pianoforte, where she could see him without anyone mistaking his title for her evidence. Their eyes met. He did not move toward her. He simply inclined his head. Matilda felt the fear remain, but it no longer controlled her feet. She walked forward in her plain black shoes. Mrs. Albright followed with the folder of documents. Mr. Ellison sat among the musicians, his violin resting across his knees. Mr. Harrowby, the independent solicitor, occupied a chair near the aisle with a sealed packet secured inside a leather case. The seal remained intact. The wooden box containing the ivory slipper was in Matilda's hands. Bexham saw it first. His expression changed. Hester saw Matilda next. The warmth vanished from her face. "Miss Draycott," Bexham said smoothly, "I was not aware you had been invited. I was not." A murmur moved through the nearest rows. Hester rose. "This is precisely the disturbance I warned you of." Matilda looked at her. Once, that tone would have reduced her to apology. Now, she heard only strategy. "Then you will not be surprised." Bexham stepped closer. "The concert is about to begin. Yes, you cannot interrupt a public performance because of personal resentment." Matilda held his gaze. "I have no wish to interrupt the music." She looked toward the program in his hand. only the false name attached to it. The room quieted. Hester's face tightened. Enough. You are humiliating yourself. No, Matilda said. I have done that long enough for other people's comfort. She walked to the closed pianoforte and placed the wooden box on its polished surface. Then she opened it. The ivory satin slipper lay inside, faintly stained where blood had dried into the fabric. Several guests leaned forward. Hester went still. Matilda lifted the slipper and placed it beside the printed program bearing Hester's name. The night His Grace first noticed me, I was playing this music. Hester's voice cut through the room. This is grotesque. Matilda did not look at her. I was also bleeding. Neither fact seemed important enough for anyone to ask who was paying the price. Silence followed, not the empty silence of shock, a listening silence. Matilda turned toward the audience. The slipper is not proof that I composed the Fantasia. It is proof of what I was willing to endure while someone else accepted praise for it. The proof of authorship is elsewhere. Bexham laughed once. At last, something sensible. Then perhaps we can dispense with theatrics. Rupert's expression hardened, but he remained where Matilda had placed him. She looked at Mrs. Albright. The widow brought forward the folder. Matilda opened it. This is the incomplete printer's proof supplied through Mr. Bexham's office. She held it up. It ends before the final variation. Bexham lifted his chin, because final corrections were still pending. From whom? He did not answer at once. Matilda continued. This is an earlier rehearsal copy in my hand. It contains the passage Mr. Ellison was taught months before Mrs. Draycott publicly claimed the piece. Mr. Ellison stood. That is true. Bexham turned toward him. A musician's memory is hardly conclusive. Mr. Ellison's face flushed, but he remained standing. Then use the date in my own notes. Matilda placed the dated rehearsal part beside the proof. Hester's voice was icy. Copyists make corrections. That does not make them composers. No, Matilda said. It does not. She drew out the manuscript page Bexham had sent her. This is also in my hand. Relief flickered across Bexham's face too quickly. Matilda saw it, but the later correction is not. She pointed to the darker ink. That alteration introduces the same technical error that appeared in your printed edition. Bexham's mouth tightened. That proves nothing. Then perhaps you can explain why my earlier version does not contain the error. She placed the two pages side by side. The difference was visible even to those who knew nothing of music. Bexham stepped closer. Rupert moved one pace forward. Only one. Matilda had asked him to prevent evidence from being removed. His presence was enough. Bexham stopped. Hester rose fully now. This is absurd. Matilda has spent years copying my work. She knows my style because she has lived inside it. Matilda looked at her. Then you should know the ending. The room changed. Hester's face lost color. Bexham spoke immediately. The orchestra will perform the published version. Good, Matilda said. Let them. Confusion moved through the audience. Matilda turned to the conductor. Play it exactly as printed. He looked toward Bexham, then toward the subscribers, then at Matilda. Finally, he lifted his baton. The orchestra began. The first movement filled the room. Matilda stood beside the pianoforte and listened to music she had once written alone in darkness while another woman sat beneath public admiration. The themes developed. The violins entered. The cello answered. Every measure carried her memory. Then the printed score reached its end. The orchestra stopped. The silence that followed was incomplete. Everyone could hear it. The musical question remained unanswered. Bexham stepped forward. A provisional ending. Matilda looked at Hester. Then complete it. Hester's eyes flashed. I will not be tested like a schoolgirl. You are being asked to finish your own composition. This is beneath me. Matilda's voice remained calm. Then explain why the final theme returns in inversion rather than repetition. Hester stared at her. No answer came. The pause lengthened. Matilda looked toward Mr. Harrowby. Now. The solicitor rose, opened his leather case, and held up the sealed packet. Received 3 days ago from His Grace the Duke of Wexbourne, at Miss Draycott's instruction. The seal was recorded in my office and has remained intact. He carried it forward. Matilda looked at Rupert. He had not opened it. He had done exactly what she asked. Miss Harrowby broke the seal before witnesses and removed the complete score. The final variation appeared in Matilda's hand. Hester spoke too quickly. She could have written that afterward. After what? Matilda asked. After the preview? Hester faltered. Matilda turned to the room. The sealed score was deposited before tonight's confrontation. The printer's version ends where my copied manuscript ended. The final variation was never in Mr. Bexam's possession. Bexam's face had gone pale. This is manipulation. Then let us remove the paper. Matilda sat at the pianoforte. The room became utterly still. She placed her hands on the keys. You have heard the unfinished ending. She looked at the orchestra. Now, Thinson, she played. The missing variation began softly. The main theme returned, not repeated, but transformed. The melody that had once seemed obedient now resisted easy resolution. The cello answered. The violin entered exactly where Matilda had insisted it should. The harmonies gathered every earlier phrase and changed their meaning. Then the final theme returned in inversion, altered by everything that had come before. The last chord sounded. No one moved. Matilda lifted her hands from the keys. That is the ending. Hester's voice shook. She completed my idea. Matilda stood. Then tell them why the final theme returns in inversion rather than repetition. Hester said nothing. Bexam turned toward the aisle. Rupert's voice stopped him. Mr. Bexam. He did not shout. He did not need to. The witnesses may appreciate your remaining long enough to hear what you sold them. Bexam stopped. Mr. Ellison confirmed Matilda's earlier instructions. The printer's dated proof established the missing pages. Mr. Harrowby confirmed custody of the sealed score. The altered page revealed the later correction. Piece by piece, the polished story collapsed. Matilda had written the works. Hester had provided access to fashionable rooms. Bexam had printed them under Hester's name. Matilda had been kept dependent through threats to her employment and reputation. Her silence had been treated as permission. A subscriber in the front row stood and said he would support no further edition under false attribution. Another withdrew from Hester's music committee. The conductor quietly placed his baton down and turned toward Matilda, not Hester. Bexam's confidence vanished. Hester remained standing beneath the gaze of the same society whose admiration she had stolen. Rupert did not claim victory. He looked at Matilda and waited. Only after the evidence had been heard did he step forward. There is one further truth I owe this room, he said. Every face turned toward him. I once attempted to protect Miss Draycott by cancelling the very opportunity she needed. She was right to refuse me that authority. Matilda looked at him. The public admission cost him something. She could see that. He gave it anyway. Then he stepped back. No proposal, no claim, no attempt to turn her triumph into his. Matilda looked at the blooded slipper beside Hester's program. Once, she had played through pain because she believed stopping would inconvenience everyone else. Tonight, She had stopped an entire room until her name was heard. The conductor picked up the program, crossed out Hester's name, and looked toward Matilda. "Miss Draycott," he said, "what should we play now?" Matilda looked at the orchestra, then at the sealed score open upon the pianoforte. "Begin again," she said, this time when the first note sounded. The music belonged to the woman who had written it. Several months later, the first printed program bearing Matilda Draycott's name arrived on a grey morning in Yorkshire. It came wrapped in cream paper, tied with narrow string, and delivered to the modest house where she had chosen to remain while the last consequences of the York concert unfolded. She opened it alone, not because no one cared, but because some moments belonged first to the person who had paid for them. The paper was smooth beneath her fingers. The type was black and clean. At the center stood the words, "Composed by Miss Matilda Draycott." She read them once, then again. She did not cry. Not immediately. She simply traced her name with one finger as though confirming that the letters would remain where they had been placed. No one could move them to a margin. No one could erase them beneath another woman's title. No one could call them a misunderstanding. Behind her, the door opened softly. Mrs. Albright entered carrying tea and stopped when she saw the program in Matilda's hands. "It came?" Matilda nodded. The widow set down the tray. "Well?" Matilda looked at the page again. "It appears they have spelled my name correctly." Mrs. Albright smiled. A promising beginning. The consequences for Hester and Bexham had not been theatrical. They were worse for people like them because they were real. Hester publicly withdrew her claim to the Fantasia and to 2 earlier works whose drafts could be traced to Matilda's hand. She resigned from the York Music Patronage Committee before its members could formally remove her. Invitations diminished. Praise disappeared. The same people who had once described her as inspired now spoke of unfortunate judgment and regrettable ambition. Hester continued to live comfortably, but the admiration she had stolen no longer entered the room before her. For a woman who had valued recognition more than truth, the punishment was exact. Godfrey Bexham lost the edition. Several important subscribers withdrew. Musicians refused to participate in further performances arranged under his supervision until questions about false attribution were resolved. Through solicitors, Matilda asserted her ownership of the complete score and ended all professional dealings with him. There was no dramatic trial, no modern spectacle, no single public blow that destroyed him. There was something quieter. Trust withdrew, contracts followed. His name remained known, but not as he had intended. Matilda chose a new publisher only after reading every term herself. Rupert offered no recommendation until she asked. Even then, he gave 3 names instead of 1. "You distrust certainty now," she observed when he presented the list. They were walking in the walled garden of Mrs. Albright's cousin's estate, where propriety was preserved by the presence of the older woman several yards behind them. Rupert looked thoughtful. "I distrust my certainty. Other people may keep theirs if they like. That is generous. I am told I am improving. Slowly. You continue to wound me. You survive remarkably well." He smiled. The humor between them had changed. Once, it had been armor. Now it was permission. Rupert courted her properly. He sent letters that asked questions rather than announcing decisions. He visited with chaperones present. He never once suggested that marriage should end her work. When Matilda traveled to York to rehearse with musicians for a new performance, he did not ask when she would stop. He asked what she needed. Sometimes the answer was nothing. He learned to accept that. Sometimes the answer was his company. He learned not to look too pleased. The months passed. Trust deepened without spectacle. Matilda discovered that love, when it was safe, did not arrive as surrender. It arrived in small choices repeated until fear lost authority. One afternoon, beneath bare branches at the edge of a Yorkshire estate, Rupert stopped walking. Mrs. Albright was still visible behind them, examining late roses with exaggerated interest. Matilda turned toward him. "You have become quiet, a dangerous sign, usually." He looked at her with none of his usual deflection. "I have something to ask." Matilda's heartbeat changed. "Then ask it. Not as a duke. You cannot misplace the title so easily." "No, but I can refuse to use it as leverage." His voice grew quieter. "I do not wish to rescue you. I do not wish to improve your position by making you dependent on mine. I do not wish to become the reason your work is taken seriously." Matilda held his gaze. Rupert continued, "I want a life beside you. That is all. Though I admit I want it with unreasonable persistence." Her eyes stung. She looked away for a moment, toward the garden wall, the pale sky, the road beyond the trees. Then she asked the question that had lived in her long before he spoke. "And if the world becomes cruel again?" Rupert answered without hesitation, "I will stand beside you." She looked back at him. Not in front. His smile was quiet. "I have learned the dangers of blocking the view." Matilda laughed then, and the laugh broke something open inside her. Not pain. Something gentler. She took a breath. "Then yes." Rupert went still. "Yes? You have already asked once." "I should hate to encourage repetition," he laughed, and for a moment neither of them remembered rank, society, music, or scandal. There was only the relief of being chosen by someone who had first learned not to choose for her. Their wedding took place in a small Yorkshire village church the following spring. No ballroom waited. No society crowd gathered to witness a reversal. The church was filled instead with people who knew the truth. Mrs. Albright sat in the front pew. Mrs. Canning came from Falconhurst. Mr. Ellison brought his violin. Even the printer who had testified about the missing pages sent flowers and a note declaring himself relieved to have once been useful. Matilda wore a simple gown and walked without pain. Her plain shoes were hidden beneath the hem, but she smiled at the thought of them. Rupert waited near the altar, composed until he saw her. Then every trace of practiced amusement left his face. The ceremony was quiet. The vows were clear. No one applauded. They did not need to. Afterward, as the guests settled again, the parish organist prepared to play. A small printed program rested in each pew. Matilda had seen the wording before the service and approved it herself, composed by Miss Matilda Draycott. Not Mrs. Hester Draycott, not the Duchess of Wexbourne, not merely the wife of a duke. Her own name, her own work. Before the organist began, Matilda opened the velvet pouch at her side and took out her father's silver tuning fork. Rupert watched her. He said nothing. She struck it gently against the wooden rail. A clear note sounded in the church. Pure, steady, true. The organist took the pitch. Then the music began. The opening theme moved through the nave, no longer hidden behind another woman's name. It rose into the high stone arches and returned changed by everything that had come before. Matilda stood beside Rupert and listened. Once, she had sat at a pianoforte while blood gathered beneath her shoes and applause belonged to someone else. Now her work filled the church openly. Rupert had not given her the note. Society had not given it to her. Love had not created what was already there. The note had always been hers, and this time everyone knew her name.